How's it going, guys? John Bleeger here, and today we're going to talk about tuning your 2011. Now, these principles apply to most semi-automatic pistols you might use in competition. This is my method for getting my open gun tuned for me, for my ammo, for my grip, for the way I hold the gun, all of it. So keep in mind that no gun is going to be set up exactly right for you, and you're not going to know that until you play with it. So these are just some of the ways that you can play with the setup of your pistol to get that return to zero exactly where you want it. Now, I have different grip strength than the next person. I've had several wrist surgeries, so my grip strength is not quite there. So I spend a lot of time on the range tuning a gun so it gets it as close back to zero as I can expect. So some things you're going to need, obviously, some different recoil springs. I got all of these from Shooter's Connection Incorporated here in Kentucky. I also bring out some wire cutters to trim coils one at a time if I so choose, as well as some Aluma buffs. Now those are present at Shooter's Connection as well. You can use Wilson Combat shock buffs if you want a polymer version. I personally really like the Aluma buffs because they don't rip up, they don't shred. If they do get mangled, then I find it at a match, I can just file them down and get them to fit again and not compromise the integrity of my gun. So what we have here is we have two barrels. They're spaced roughly 5 yards apart, and we have two paper targets downrange. One's about, 5 yards, one's about 10, 13, something like that. What we're going to do is with each setup of recoil spring and such in our gun, we're going to run the same drill 2 or 3 times. Now, you're going to start at one barrel, draw, shoot both targets, book it over to the other barrel and shoot both targets. What does this do for you? Well, first of all, it gives you a natural grip on the gun. You're not starting at low ready or whatever. This is the grip that you're probably going to have on the buzzer when the buzzer goes off. So starting there, boom, we rip 2 shots at each target, and then we move, and that forces us to change our grip maybe, to get moving and have an entry into that position with the gun up. And we're going to fire 2 at each target. Now the key here is to be watching for vertical dispersion. If you see lateral dispersion, the rounds are far apart, side to side, that's all you. That's not the gun. The gun can only move on certain axes. Okay, it can only move back and forth like this and impact your grip like that. So if you are getting side to side, that's all in your grip. And one thing I've been fighting lately is consistent grip pressure with my left hand. So this gun is set up the way it's been for a while. I'm going to run some drills, run this drill exactly like this, and then we're going to get into tuning. Let's go. Okay, so that went all right. Looking like we're getting a little bit of dispersion vertical. I called some bad shots on that right target. But we're getting about, call it 6 inches at 5 yards dispersion here. Some of them closer than others. I can tighten that up a little bit. So I'm going to take the gun apart. I'm going to take out the guts that I have in it right now. And I'm going to throw a 7-pound variable to start with, and maybe try a 7-pound standard. Having a selection of recoil springs as the first step. You need to have some things to try and go progressively before you find what you like and what's going to work well for your gun. Now keep in mind that reliability is key in all of this. So if you go too far in any one direction, either too heavy of a recoil spring or too light, you can start having feed and performance issues. If you add too many buffs, you can reduce the stroke of the gun to the point where, 1, you lose your slide lock ability, and 2, it may not have enough time for that round to rise up in the mag and be stripped off. So with 1 buff, you're going to be fine. 2, it depends on the gun. 3, it's rare you can get a gun to run reliable with 3 buffs. So let's go tear down this pistol and change the guts out. All right, we are clear. Take that rocker off. All right, take our recoil system out. Now, I forget what weight spring this is on the heavier side, but I'm going to take it out. Keep in mind where my reverse plug is. I'm going to go back to standard, meaning a full-length spring with no buffs, and we're going to try that next. So let's start with an 8. This is a Wolf 8-pound traditional spring. 41908 is the part number. Most gunsmiths recommend an 8 or a 9-pound spring with their open guns, especially a 9. There are risks to going too light, you know, frame battering, life of the gun. Me personally, I focus on performance first. I can have other guns built. This is the Formula One race car division, so stuff is gonna break. Accept it. Bring your pocketbook. And we're gonna run this same drill again. Now, it's important to try to keep the variables as close to the same as possible. Meaning, I don't want to be just hammering these drills and getting super warmed up. The whole point of this is to find out where this gun with this setup hits and how I can correct that. So let's run it again. All right, this is a 7-pound traditional, no buffs. Yeah, that felt pretty good. I want to run that one again. Let's change mags and do one more drill of that. I feel like my shots were pretty close together on the vertical side of things. All right, yeah, that feels pretty good. We're seeing a tiny bit of dispersion on the vertical. Let me just bring the camera down. Man, my grip is really inconsistent today. I'm not doing great in that far target acquiring it. But we have a decent amount of alphas here. We can see, let me put this tripod down. So what we're looking for is this right here. This is what's telling us the spring on the gun, not this. This is all me. This is all the swinging the gun across, not holding the gun consistent. But the vertical dispersion, that's what we're looking for. Let's go to the farther target. Now, obviously I'm taking slower shots on these, but we can see here we have a flyer up here in the edge, but overall we got some decent dispersion. So I'm going to keep this same spring. I'm going to keep this same spring in here for right now, but I'm going to add one buff without changing anything else to see if I can deaden that slide impact just a tiny bit and see where we go from there. Let's try it. All right, we're back at our impromptu bench. Let's clear the gun. We are clear. Gun's starting to heat up just a little bit. And now as simple as adding a buff. Okay. Put our buff on the guide rod like so. Now, one thing people don't know is with recoil springs, you want the closed end on 1911s anyway towards the base. See how that one's closed up and that one's open? Might be hard to see with the camera. But we always put the closed end towards the breech. All right, time to run that drill one more time. I wanted to take this opportunity to go in a little bit more detail about buffs and cutting coils. So let me take this recoil system out and I'm going to go into a little bit more depth. So when it comes to tuning recoil systems, it's not just about the spring weight and spring length and such. You can tune the performance of the gun to have that dot return be exactly what you want. Now, ways we can do that are obviously, as we discussed, with the spring weight and with buffs. But what people don't realize is when you add buffs, I mean, a lot of people do realize it's not that hard, is you're shortening that stroke. So let me get another buff on here, get it lined up, and put this recoil spring back on. We have just shortened the travel of the slide relative, shortened the travel of the slide. It's going to bottom out sooner. So one thing we need to be aware of when we add buffs is to make sure we're not getting spring bind. And I'm going to try to do this without shooting it across the range here. So you can see how the guide rod, the reverse plug is making contact. The spring is not halting the progression of the reverse plug to the point where the spring is binding. Now we're getting kind of close, so we'd want to, potentially cut a coil or two off of here. But that's one check you can do. Make sure you're not getting spring bind. As long as your reverse plug is bottoming out like so, you should be fine. But one of the things you can do is you can trim coils, and what that does is it softens the final little bit of travel. It reduces some momentum from the slide as it locks up. generally speaking, when I put a buff in, I trim one coil, so on and so forth, 2 buffs, 2 coils, and I go from there. The dot tends to be more sluggish on the return, but maybe you like that. So trimming coils and adding or removing buffs are another aspect of tuning that you can use to get what you want out of the gun. Keep in mind that you are running the risk of adding more beating up your gun more by trimming coils and going away from the manufacturer or the gunsmith's recommendation. All right, this is 7-pound standard with 1 shock buff, no coils cut. Let's see what the target tells us. Well, I forgot to shoot the other target, but overall I'm liking it. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to run that one more time because that felt good. And the hits on the target tell me that I'm right. Hold on. Whoa, we're stacking them. Ooh, missed the draw on that one. All right, let's go down and look at the targets. Now, I got a little excited there, but I am seeing that dot return and stay steady right where I pulled the trigger the first time. We are seeing a little bit of dispersion. I shot too many rounds here to get a real tell. But man, I'm pretty sure some of these stacked pairs were those runs. And I know for a fact that these 2 hits were from the same string. So ideally, you're doing 1 run and then assessing and looking where your hits are at. You could also use slow motion video to see if you're getting muzzle dip or if the muzzle is, higher than where it was when you pull this shot in the second shot. However, in open, it is a lot about what the dot does and what you want it to do. So me, I don't care what the dot does in between shots. I want that dot to return and not do the jumpy jump at the end. The moving up and down. And I'm getting that with this setup. I'm going to put a few more rounds through it to verify. And then it's just on running the gun and getting used to the gun. There is no replacement for training. There is no replacement for having time on the gun in both dry fire and live fire and learning what that gun does. All right, learning the presentation, finding that dot, learning what the gun does under recoil, making sure it works with weak hand and strong hand. All that comes into play. But you can use some of these techniques to verify your tuning. All right, just slapping a spring in there and calling it good, it's not going to give you 100% of the performance it can get. And adding some movement and some draw and some realistic, so to speak, test of that return is going to give you some benefits. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, throw them in the comments and see if I can't answer them. And other than that, train hard, and I'll see you on the range.